This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 145, Answering Listener Questions. For this episode, I asked my listeners for questions they wanted answered about the podcast, about me, or anything else. Across several platforms, I received a lot of great questions. In this episode, I'll answer those questions with the help of a special guest, my 18-year-old son, Andrew. This is my first ever episode devoted to answering listener questions. I'd like to take a moment to thank my newest patrons, Jen M. from Bozeman, Montana, and Madison H. from Alabama. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you, as always, to all of my patrons. If you'd like to make a pledge, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. This episode is very different from my usual format, and I hope you all understand that I mean absolutely no disrespect to the children I talk about on the show by creating an episode like this, which is much more lighthearted in most places than my usual episodes are. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to my son, Andrew. We share a lot of the same interests and the same sense of humor, and this is the first time I've really gotten to show you that side of myself. I hope you have as much fun listening to the episode as we had making it. My guest on the podcast today is someone I've talked about but never actually had on the show. Please welcome my son, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andy. And we're going to try to get this done because we're both goofy goobers.
We have a case of the giggles while we're trying to record this, which is generally our default state. So I apologize if we get silly at some point.
All
so
right.
Andy's going to be reading the questions for me to try to answer.
Salem's Gigi on YouTube says, what led you to start your channel focusing on child abuse?
Well, I had always been interested in true crime from a young age, probably far too young. But when I first read the book Small Sacrifices about Diane Downs, that's my first interest in children's cases came about. So over the years, I tended to follow the children's cases, and I noticed that most of them didn't get nearly as much media coverage. I always wondered about that. And now that I've been doing this for 4 years since I started the blog, it's become very apparent why it's very hard to focus on these cases because it's really a difficult subject matter. But I started the blog in 2019 as a place that I could start just writing articles about these kids and doing some intensive research and trying to put together the most intensive blog posts possible about their cases. And that's where that started. And from there, the podcast came about. I think that answers that question, I hope.
Jessica Mingo Art Studio on Instagram says, what was the tipping point for you to decide to make the leap of faith and start this podcast?
Basically what happened, I had worked at a community bank for 18 years, and I was leading the call center there. So I was the voice of the bank, and I had a lot of experience talking for a living, obviously. And then at the end of 2019, the bank told us that they were going to outsource our department. And at that point, I was thinking, what do I want to do from here? So I figured, I'm going to give it a try and start the podcast based on the blog that I had already been doing for just about a year. And then the month after I left the bank and started the podcast, quarantine started. So it kind of all coincided that I really couldn't go out and look for a job at that point. So that's how that all came about.
Christina F., Amity S., Kenzie F., and Bridget H. on Facebook would like to know how you choose the cases you cover, saying, because a lot of these aren't high-profile cases and not much research available on them, do families contact you to do their children's stories?
There's a whole process behind choosing what case I cover, but a lot of it is just gathering a ton of names. I have a huge spreadsheet full of, I don't even know, a few hundred kids' names and the details of their cases, where they took place, their ages, and that sort of thing. And then I also have just Post-it notes absolutely everywhere.
Sorry to interrupt, but we do have a special guest.
Oh, another special guest on my podcast today.
His name is Ricky.
Ricky the cat. And he was just screaming outside of my room, so we had to bring him in so he would stop.
No.
He does not usually sound like that.
But
he's not happy about being held right now.
But that's okay.
A lot of the cases that I put on my list are listener suggestions. A lot of families do contact me to cover their kids' stories. So that's what happens is I'll either get emails, Facebook messages, Instagram messages, basically any platform you can think of. So that's how I get a lot of them. As far as how I choose which one to do, that's kind of hard to say. I will sometimes just scroll through my list and say, here's one, I'm going to do this. Or the details will stand out to me. Or if it's a time leak, for example, if a case has just closed, then maybe I'll do that case the next week sort of thing. Oh, and as far as them not being high-profile cases, I do that on purpose. There's enough people covering some stories that are out there and you see them in the headlines every day. I don't need to be covering that. You know, there's plenty of coverage on that. That child has a voice. When it comes to a case that only had local media coverage, or maybe it was only a big headline in that area or that particular country or that state, then I'm more likely to cover it because it's not as well known. And that's what's important to me, is because the kids who don't get the coverage deserve it. That's why I started this podcast to begin with.
Kenzie also said, I know you mention in many podcasts how there's so many cases out there that you want to talk about. Are there some cases you want to cover but can't?
There definitely are some cases that I'd like to cover but just can't get enough information about them. So sometimes I'll have to, either contact the family members, which I usually do anyway for each case. So yes, there are cases that I would not mind covering or would like to get to at some point. I just haven't had time because there's so many of them. As far as not being able to cover them, the only thing that would hold me back from covering a case is if I don't have enough information to put together an entire episode. And a lot of times when it comes to the cases with less information, I will still make a mini-sode out of it and put that out for Patreon listeners. If you pledge $10 or more per month, then you get access to the growing library of Patreon-exclusive bonus minisodes. Oh, and as far as cases that I would like to cover but can't, I will definitely go so far as to say that I steer clear of ongoing custody disputes where a child hasn't passed away, but they're in danger. Unfortunately, I cannot cover those on the podcast. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the main reasons is I have gotten involved in those before and they ended very, very badly. So it's just not something that I can do. I can't really get involved with the ongoing custody disputes, unfortunately, because I know some of them really do need to be publicized, but it's a very, very difficult place to be as any kind of content creator.
Mm-hmm. Irlandi22 on YouTube says, I live in France, where the names and faces of children abused to death are rarely revealed, or even the circumstances of their deaths, and of course, the same applies to their killers. Has there been any case that you wanted to cover but couldn't find enough information?
Yes, it is hard to cover some cases from different countries. I have not found one in France yet that I could cover. It's just very hard to get the information you need. I know there's one that someone suggested to me from Germany that was the same way. I'm still trying to dig up information on Fabio from Germany, but that's one of the main reasons that I wouldn't be able to cover it, is it's hard. Even if it's a translation issue, I still will do it. I've done stories where I had to do a lot of translation, and it's a challenge, I'll tell you that, but it's not impossible, so I definitely don't steer clear of those because of that.
Max with a lowercase m on Instagram says, have you turned down a case someone suggested?
I don't know that I've ever flat out turned down a case. Generally, if someone suggests a case to me, and it fits the type of cases that I generally cover, which is children who are murdered by their caretakers, parents, guardians, family members. If it's, a child abduction by a stranger or a neighbor or something like that, I generally don't touch those because those often get a lot of media coverage as it is. And that's not really what I'm doing with this podcast. I'm really trying to raise awareness of child abuse and how often it happens and the signs that we can look for, which I think after doing so many episodes, it's come clear to me what the signs are and what we can look for and what the similarities are between these cases. But I just went on a tangent, so I apologize for that. But yeah, I don't think I've ever actually flat out turned down a case. And also, Max, thank you for all of your questions. There's a few more from Max coming up.
Max with a lowercase m on Instagram says, I know there was an issue before where a podcast copied one of yours almost verbatim. Has it happened since, and how do you deal with it? Other than calling their no good butts out on air.
I love you, Max. That happened a couple of years ago, I guess now, which seems...
About 2, I think.
Yeah, it seems impossible, but yes, where a fellow true crime content creator on YouTube had taken my blog posts and read them basically word for word on the air without giving me credit. And then when I called him out on it, he basically said, oh, I've never heard of her, which is funny because he was using the photos that I had used on my blog with my watermark on them. So yeah, he had heard of me, but basically that hasn't happened since. He has blocked me on everything since then, which is, the mature way to go about it. As far as I know, he hasn't used me as an uncredited source since then. I'm hoping he learned his lesson and doesn't do that to other people as well. I did have another situation where the blog was plagiarized. And I don't know who it was. It was a website that it was not within the country. So it was outside the country. I don't know who it was, but they were just basically copying posts and pasting them on their website. And I never really did get a resolution on that. Reaching out to their webmaster had no effect. So that was interesting. But that's kind of the reason that I don't update the blog very much ever at all, because it's just such an icky feeling. I don't know how else to put it. It just makes my skin crawl. It's just it's a violation is how it feels, that someone has taken your work, used it, passed it off as their own, and not even mentioned your name, which is really all I wanted in the first place. If you're going to use my hard work and my research and my words, literally my opinions, which he read on air as if they were his own, then just say who you got it from. That's all I'm asking. I'm not even gonna name him. I don't want to give him the traffic.
I also have something to add to this story. When this happened, my mom was very upset, rightfully so, because he completely plagiarized her and went about it in the most childish way he possibly could, blocked her and didn't say a word, just pretended it didn't happen, basically. So he had a section on his website where you could leave him reviews. I told him that he was a disgusting human being and that every time God remembered that he created him, he would weep. So please support this podcast and not his if you know who he is.
Let's just say my kids are a little protective of me.
A little bit. Okay.
I'm good. Okay.
All right. Next question. Abby Normal on Instagram says, how do the podcast episodes you do impact you as a person doing the research?
It can be heavy. It can be really heavy. I will be sitting here at my computer many days just tearing up. It's very hard to read some of these details and to know that this stuff is actually happening right now. That the case I cover in a year could be going on as I am sitting here recording this. It's heavy, and there's so much awful detail that I do dig up that I don't hold back on telling on the podcast because I think it's important. Like I say all the time, if these kids can endure it, we can damn well listen to it. So I definitely don't hold anything back. And I think it is important to know what they're going through so that we know what to look for and we know how important it is to say something if we do see or hear something. But yeah, it does weigh on me very heavily. My kids can tell you that as well, that I basically have this stuff on my mind 24/7, but it also comes down to other families are suffering, the families that I talk to, and it's painful to know how much pain they're in. So it makes for some dark moments in my mind.
Next question. This one again is from Max with a lowercase m on Instagram. How many hours of research go into a case on average? I can answer this. A lot.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah, I do spend an awful lot of time sitting at my computer reading through court documents and news articles and watching YouTube videos or whatever. I can't even estimate. Let's say, for example, Jack and Jennifer's case, which I did episodes 142 and 143. That took probably a good 3 full solid days. And I'm not sitting here working 8-hour days. I'm talking about, 12, 14 hours.
More than that.
A day, yeah.
You'll get up at 7 o'clock and work until 3 a.m.
Sometimes I go a little crazy, but yeah, a lot of hours. I just basically work till I found every detail I can uncover, then write it into an episode and go with it. So however many it takes is the answer to that question, Max.
All right. Emily L. on YouTube says, have you ever received any negative feedback or criticism from the families of victims you cover? If so, how did you respond? Max has a similar question from Instagram. Do you get threats from family or friends of those you have exposed on your podcast?
I have not so much threats, although I will say with one episode way back, a boyfriend of a mom who was never criminally charged, but was indicated by DCP&P as being responsible for her daughter's death. Her boyfriend at the time had plenty to say to me. He was sending me all kinds of messages, blowing up my Facebook page. And we're talking within the first 20 episodes. So it was, I was very concerned. And I was thinking, if this is what it's going to be like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But it turned out I don't get that very often. Thank goodness. I can think of one for sure where a family was unhappy with how I handled, not the case, but the research, I think. And that was also very, very early on within the first maybe 10 episodes. It was a stepmom, an innocent parent had gotten in touch with me and was not happy about how I found my information or whatever. I will use public information whenever possible. And that includes public posts on Facebook. So, in some cases, people feel that's an invasion of privacy. I understand that completely. I try not to use information that just feels too personal. But yeah, I've learned that since I started, where the line is and how not to cross it. So I really try now to get the family involved whenever I possibly can, because it helps to be able to get their perspective and also to be able to ask them the information I need or the information they want out there.
Max, again on Instagram, says, have you, through your intense investigations in a case, brought any information that has helped strengthen charges against anyone involved in it?
I'm not sure. I have definitely gotten involved in some cases before prosecutions have happened, but I don't know that I had any direct involvement in it, just that I helped get the information out. I've helped with some investigations in that I provided information to the police, yes. For example, a recent one was the Kenzia case, which I haven't done an update on that one yet. There's definitely an investigation going, so that's something that I've helped with. But other than that, I'm not 100% sure about that. It would be awesome. I would love to be a part of that, but so far I don't know of any for sure.
James M. on Facebook, who is also Charlotte's granddad, says, how many times have the courts tried to keep you quiet with gag orders or other such methods?
Believe it or not, none. I have, knock on wood, not received any sort of legal threats as far as that goes. I've received a couple of them from, say, family members who don't want the information out there that is out there, although it is public information and not untrue because I'm going off of court documents or CPS reports and that sort of thing. But I haven't, knock on wood again, I haven't been threatened by the courts.
Max with a lowercase m on Instagram says, what is the average cost to research a case for a podcast? I know many newspapers, document searches, etc. are costly.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a lot of monthly cost that goes into it because I do subscribe to, oh my gosh, I can't even think of how many. I usually try not to subscribe to newspapers longer than I need them. So I'm constantly getting phone calls from newspapers in California, Michigan, wherever, saying, why don't you come back to us? And I have to disappoint them by telling them, I'm sorry, I'm in a totally different state. But I think, let's see, there's some cases where you can't even look them up without a charge. So it's hard to estimate. It's hard to say how much it costs per case because it's all different. It depends on how many newspapers have free electronic access as opposed to paid monthly, whatever. There's a bunch of different websites I use and things like that.
Michael M. on Facebook says, I'd love to know how you are able to do what you do without being angry at the world. She can't.
Yeah, that's assuming I am not always angry at the world. I try to channel the anger that I definitely feel from a lot of these cases into doing something about it. And that's kind of what I feel like I'm doing. I know some people wouldn't consider this necessarily doing something about it, but raising awareness of the signs and symptoms and other topics, like I've done series on Munchausen by proxy and things like that. I just feel like it's, at least it makes me feel like I'm doing something. And families have told me I've helped them. So it's rewarding enough that it does help me to try to at least quell some of that anger.
And you're also teaching young women who were your age when you got into your relationship what signs to look for.
Yeah.
And what to be aware of. And if your parents tell you, get away from them, get away from them.
There's a lot of bad parents I talk about on this show, but there's also a lot of people who should probably listen to their parents' advice.
Sorry to interrupt your program.
Again.
But we have another guest.
Yes. Now we have Nova the kitty.
She doesn't say much, but she's here.
She says plenty, but not when we want her to.
Yeah, no.
Look at the eyes.
She's so sleepy.
She's so sleepy. We just baby talk our cat all day, every day.
Robin L. on Facebook says, are you ever involved with the Department of Child Services for the cases you cover?
I've never actually had to be involved directly with any child protective services agency, but I have heard from a number of CPS representatives or people who have worked for them. I've actually had a couple of people say they went into social work because of the podcast, which is a huge honor. And that's amazing because there's not enough good people in that field. So just hearing that is, that makes all the difference for me.
Tina S. on Facebook says, it seems as though nearly every case has CPS or DFS involvement, and a large number are children removed at birth and reunited later when the child and parents have not had a chance to bond. My question is, are there any studies on the risk for abuse in these children as compared to those who are not taken at birth and bond as infants?
I don't know if there's any specific studies on that as far as CPS taking children at birth or whatnot, but I know there are studies in the past that have been done about what happens to children who don't bond as infants with their parents. And it's pretty scary. There's a YouTube documentary. I have to find it. If I can find it, I'll link it in the show notes for this episode, just about the lack of bonding. And that's dangerous for these kids, like with Judah, for example, or baby Dylan, or even AJ. There's a lot of kids that I could mention who had that situation come up, and they tend to be the target child because the parent didn't bond with them at all. So there's got to be something, and I would hope that at some point there will be studies done on that.
Sarah R. on Facebook says, what do you personally think we need to see as far as changes with CPS? As a foster/adoptive parent, it's so hard for me to understand how CPS thinks it's okay to place a newborn in a loving foster home, sometimes for years, and then rip them away back to their abusive bio parents. So many cases of this end badly. Should there be a time limit? Can we really keep letting bio parents work the case for years? What kind of damage is this doing to toddlers who are securely attached to the only family they know, being forced back with unfit bio family? It makes me sick to think some of these kids knew love with their foster family and then had that all taken away from them thanks to CPS.
Yeah, so that goes along with the previous question also. And, Bradley McGee comes to mind. And again, Dylan, whose foster mom only had him for a short time. He was only a couple months old. But there's definitely got to be some kind of an ongoing trauma problem, even for the kids who aren't harmed necessarily. But yeah, there's definitely a problem, and they do need to do more studies on that. And I'm going to read this next question because it's pretty graphic. Marilyn C. on Facebook asked, in the James Beal case, I strongly suspect the anal prolapse was from sustained abuse and sexual trauma. What is your theory on how that happened and why it was brushed off? Was sexual abuse ever ruled out? Well, I hold to the same theory as James's mom, Kara, in that, yes, sexual abuse more likely than not caused that. Especially based on what her daughter had reported about grandpa and dad and toothbrush handles and things like that. I definitely think that there was some kind of abuse going on as far as that goes. As far as why it was brushed off and was sexual abuse ever ruled out? No, because there was no investigation done into James's death. Within 24 hours of his death, the police went on record saying there was no foul play, which they hadn't done an autopsy or any kind of investigation other than talking to the family. So there's a lot of cover up in that case. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in the least, but if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, you know what I mean? Just breaking in here with another comment that if you're hearing all kinds of noises, that's the dog, the cats,
Andy
moving in his chair. But
I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrong, but Sasha K on Facebook says, why would any lawyer go and defend these child murderers?
Yeah, I wonder that myself sometimes, and the only answer I can come back with is money. When it comes to the obviously deplorable, indefensible people, I have no idea how they could possibly think some of these people are innocent. I know everyone deserves a good defense, and maybe that's part of it, that everyone deserves to be defended. It's a constitutional right. Everyone deserves a good defense. But when it comes to a defense lawyer or attorney who's going to be making up lies or making another party look guilty, placing blame on say, the innocent mother, whatever, which is what I see an awful lot of, that's a very low, classless, scummy thing to do. Go ahead and defend your client, but don't cast a shadow on an innocent parent. It really bothers me. And sometimes I think some defense attorneys have no soul, but some of them are very necessary. And in a case like Dante Mullenix, where Tyree Bowie was wrongfully accused and was acquitted at trial, thank God for his defense attorney. You know, they are necessary, and they are not all bad.
Ashley T on Facebook says, how do you speak through these episodes without crying? I am always crying during an episode, and I just admire your courage and strength. Donna Y had a similar question.
Basically, because I have multiple takes and I'm constantly editing. There's very rarely a take that I can actually get through an entire episode without crying. It's rare. I just don't include it in the episodes. I think I did in some of the earlier ones. You could hear me get a little choked up, and that was before I learned, hey, you can do another take and just try it again. But yeah, it's hard to get through them. There's definitely no case where I've done all of the research, writing, recording, and editing without getting tearful at some point.
Katenfer on YouTube says, which case has hit you the hardest?
That's hard to answer. I can't say that any one has hit me the hardest. Recently, the Jack and Jennifer Edwards case really pushed me down a deep hole. That was a tough one. As I mentioned in the episode, it just felt very personal to me. So a lot of the times that's what does it, you know, when it brings back some of my own trauma. That, yeah, all of them kind of hit me in their own way. And it also depends on how close I am with the family. I can feel their pain a lot more acutely when I talk to them more, obviously. So yeah, it's really hard to say which one's been the hardest.
I'm not as well versed as my mom is on these cases because a lot of them bother me a lot.
Yeah, I try not to share all the details.
I'm a very sensitive person and I do cry easily. I listened to the very first few episodes, maybe, of the podcast, and I could never listen again.
Yeah.
Because I can't handle it. But I will always remember Connor and Brindley Snyder because it's just, some of them just stick with you and you always remember them. And also Blaze Spurl, because I doubt I was supposed to be hearing it when I was little, but when it was talked about, I was hearing it, and that has always stuck with me.
We have a kind of tangential connection to the case, so I know that Andy's dad and I talked about it when it was happening back in 2008. Baby Blaze, yeah, his will always stick with me too. It's just so awful, but
yeah, and having heard that and just like not fully understanding what it meant, but also understanding what it meant, that like this kid who was like my age and he was gone, like that sticks with you when you're a kid, and that has always stuck with me just on like a personal level.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Erin, aka Strange Kind of Fan Woman, on YouTube says, are there any child abuse cases that you won't cover because of how horrible they are? An example would be the case of Amora Bain Carson and baby Brianna Lopez. What those two baby girls went through is sickening. In a similar vein, Georgia T on YouTube asked, hey, can you cover the Dakota Collins case, please?
Yeah, there's definitely no case that I won't cover because it's horrible. I mean, I've covered Tegan Skiba and Teslin O'Call and Stephen Meek. I've covered some cases that are just beyond the imagination. You would hope that no one could come up with things that happened to those kids, but no, there's no case that I won't cover. I've known about Brianna's case for almost 2 decades. It's definitely one of the worst, but it's also one of the most infamous child abuse cases. And that's why I haven't tackled it yet. I do plan to at some point. As far as Dakota, it's the same thing because I've heard a lot about his case lately. But yes, they're all on my list. So hopefully at some point.
JJD on YouTube says, I would like to know what you do to separate yourself from the extremely deep research you do. And then to tell these stories, how do you separate your sorrow for these kids to be able to focus on your own life? And which are the top 3 cases that have stayed with you? I already know one that is going to be there, and that is baby Alyssa. And then a similar question from Nia Just Nia on YouTube. How do you avoid emotional burnout? It feels like knowing all the details of a pretty much endless list of heartbreaking child abuse must take a toll on you. How do you decompress from it all? And then finally, Jennifer F. from Facebook also asked, it is amazing what you do. All the research and the way you share the information on each episode with such compassion, honesty, and snark. You are my people. How do you decompress from all these horrendous, deplorable, and incomprehensible acts of cruelty committed against these children?
Yeah, so I'll start with the top 3 cases that have stayed with me. That one, like I said, it's hard to pick any case that stuck with me the most. But yeah, you're right. Baby Alyssa is always going to be there. She's one of the stories that I knew about before I even considered following them or covering them in this way. Hers just has always stuck with me. And same with Baby Blaze that I talked about, that Andy mentioned earlier. His also has stuck with me. Zara's has stuck with me since it happened in 2010. But yeah, they all stick with me in a way. And I do remember them all. And most cases I can tell you how old the child was if you just mention the name or what state they were from. I have all of this information just rattling around in there at pretty much all times. So it feels like the world's worst trivia that's just stuck up there. How do I avoid emotional burnout? I didn't know you could do that. No, I'm kidding. But self-care, who is she? I'm trying really hard not to overwork myself to the point of burnout, which I have done at least a couple of times. It gets pretty tough. So I just try to take breaks when I can. I'm one of those people who's always like, if I'm not working, I feel badly. I definitely try to take time and actually spend time with my own kids when I can.
And for anyone wondering, please don't worry. I made sure she did not work on Mother's Day.
That is correct.
I made very certain that she did not work on Mother's Day.
I was yelled at least once.
Probably like 6.
It was, Mom, get out of your Google Docs.
Many times I told her, Mom, X, now, X, out, now.
That is an accurate representation. Okay. So I try. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I try. I definitely listen to and watch comedy and, I try to make myself laugh whenever I can. So I try to avoid the true crime stuff in my off time as much as I do love so many true crime podcasts and things like that. I really haven't been listening to as many lately because it is just too much.
On the topic of that, for any fellow Canadian listeners, if you are someone who enjoys jokes that a 14-year-old boy would tell, please check out Curtis Connor. He is a wonderful YouTuber, and for someone who has struggled with depression, both of us, for many years, he has helped a lot. He's very funny, and he's very considerate, and he knows his audience. So if you need someone to just cheer you up at any time, please check him out.
He's kind of a 14-year-old boy at heart.
Yeah.
Polite Canadian boy.
Yes.
Who was raised well.
Yep.
And tells a lot of fart jokes.
Yes, he is. Yeah, if those check your boxes, please check him out, because those check ours.
Apparently. I am also a 14-year-old boy at heart.
Yeah, pretty much. Jucifer Pandora Rex on YouTube says, do you keep in contact with the family members from the cases you've covered?
Yes, I definitely do. I keep in touch with a lot of the parents and other family members of the kids that I've talked about on the podcast, and I have a lot of them as Facebook friends, and we go back and forth frequently. So yes, definitely. And I'm really thankful for a lot of the friendships that I've made through doing this work. It really means a lot to me.
Shane is basically your best friend right now.
Yeah, I've kept in very close contact with Shane Kenzia. Yeah, actually, we're going to be meeting for the first time in person next month, so that's good.
With me.
That's true. Andy's likely going with me, so.
And I'm going to hug her like I've never hugged anyone in my life.
Well, Shane has already warned me that she is going to hug the shit out of me, so we are prepared.
I am so ready for that.
Yes, absolutely.
She's basically Aunt Shane at this point.
Yes, that's true.
We love you, Shane.
That's true.
If you're listening.
Shout out to Shane.
Shout out to Shane. We love you so much.
True story.
Turkish Punisher on YouTube says, do you believe in any god?
Wow. So yeah, I wasn't sure if I should talk about this here, but I guess it's fine. I did name the podcast after a biblical reference. So I would say I consider myself agnostic. Yeah, I believe there's something. I mean, geez, I hope there's something. My other son, my younger son, my 15-year-old asked me the other day if I believe in heaven or hell. And I said, yes, I choose to believe that, because how else can you be at peace wondering, what happens? Where do these kids go? I picture them up in heaven playing together, the ones who are similar ages. I can just see them being little friends. And yeah, so I definitely choose to believe in that way.
JM on YouTube says, I know you've lately touched on your own experience with domestic abuse. Is there something specific in your childhood or your own children's history that has inspired the passion and conviction you have to uphold the memory of the young victim stories you cover?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer too. I don't know if there's anything specific. There's things I wish my kids hadn't had to be present for or witness. That's for sure. And other things that happened during their childhoods that I wish they didn't have to deal with. But I don't know if that actually inspired how strongly I feel about this. I think it's just, I have loved children since I was one. I mean, my first job that I ever wanted to be was a teacher and a mommy. And, well, I got to be one of those things.
You teach me new stuff every day.
For better or worse.
Better or worse.
I think it's really just more my love of children and my interest in why their stories don't get as much attention, really. Yeah, and my kind of ridiculous amount of empathy that I have for pretty much everyone, but, you know, especially the families and the kids themselves. That's really the reason that I feel so strongly about it.
The next question is somewhat similar. Maureen B. from Facebook says that she would love to hear your story. And Mary C. on Facebook also said, curious about your childhood. I love your compassion, your thorough research, and your dedication in sharing these stories in such a respectful way. And finally, Robin C. and Claire D. on Facebook. I'd love to know more about you. Hobbies. I also want to know about you. You never talk about you.
Man, you guys.
I can respond to this too.
You know how it is actually hard for me to talk about myself. I'm so awkward about it.
Not for me, I'll do it.
Yeah. Andy's going to sit here and tell you all the worst things about me.
No, I'm going to tell you the funniest
things
about you.
We'll hold off on that for a moment. As far as me. Okay, so my story, my childhood. Well, I grew up in rural Alberta, Canada, in a small town that was about, you'd have to drive 20 minutes to get to the next town, which was smaller than mine. So we were in the middle of nowhere and it was pretty uneventful. I grew up on a farm for the first 13 years and we did all kinds of weird farm kid stuff. My brother and I would, drive around on our three-wheelers and pretend we were the Power Rangers or the Ghostbusters.
She made him eat dirt.
Listen, I was 2. I was 3.
Doesn't excuse it.
I boosted my brother's immune system, and there is photographic evidence of this.
Yes, there is. I've seen the pictures.
We had, we made home videos a lot. I've been writing since I was little, so we would write little scripts or come up with story ideas and film them. And I will never forget some of those weird plots, where my brother would be a mad scientist who kidnapped me and kept me in the cellar. Just all kinds of weird things like that. So let's just say creativity's been there for a while. So that's as far as my childhood goes. Okay, hobbies. Well, I do a lot.
Hold on. Marvel, Stranger Things, Stephen King, the podcast.
Let's not go as far as Marvel.
She liked Marvel except for the last 2 movies because that Captain America plotline was ridiculous.
Let's just say that in my head, that storyline ended before Infinity War started. But anyway, yes. We won't go into my rant on that.
No, it's okay. Her entire bedroom is covered head to toe in it paraphernalia.
Yeah, that does seem a little weird now, come to think of it, that the child-eating clown is my...
Hey, it's okay. You got to let it out somehow.
Honestly, when I started reading Stephen King when I was 12, and that was way too early.
Pet Sematary, you said.
Pet Sematary, yeah. That one has affected me since I was very young. But yeah, my bedroom is...
She made her headboard and her dresser and her other dresser.
I decoupaged it with pages from it.
And they're all over here. And then she made sure to sort out the bad ones so that none of those awful things were on her dresser.
I forgot. Yes, I did. I hand-selected the pages so that my kids wouldn't be reading some really terrible things.
I've already read it.
Oh, my word. So, Stephen King, yeah, major interest, horror movies.
Ice Nine Kills. Check them out.
That's true.
They are an amazing band. Musical theater, horror movies, and
screamo metal.
Yes. I forgot to mention that part.
Yeah, music is a big one. I definitely have always loved music. I don't play any instruments anymore. I mean, I used to play the piano and the clarinet when I was a kid. So I listen to a lot of music, and we go to concerts whenever we can. Andy and I have been to see Queen twice with Adam Lambert.
If you're wondering what my hobbies are and what my interests are,
see above.
Scroll back a few minutes and listen to what she said, because I'm literally just a copy of her.
We definitely have some shared interests, that is for sure. We like a lot of the same stuff. We like a lot of the same TV shows. We're in the middle of binging Supernatural.
Oh, yeah. The only thing I can think of that we don't have in common is that I had a K-pop phase for a year.
Yes, and I escaped the K-pop phase because I had to live through it with him. And it was, speaking of trauma.
All right, it wasn't that bad, all
yes,
right?
It was.
Okay, at least I'm over it now.
Thank goodness.
At least I like real music.
True.
I've listened to Alkaline Trio for 6 hours today.
I am so proud of you.
Check out Alkaline Trio.
Andy's just here to give shout outs to all of the
Curtis Connor, Drew Gooden, Danny Gonzalez.
We do watch a lot of the same YouTubers. We watch a lot of the same
Jensen Ackles.
I will die on that hill.
Watch The Boys.
Yeah, you might want to be careful about endorsing that show, but yes.
If you have kids under the age of 37, don't let them watch it.
Yes. We have binged a lot of, we binged what? Shameless.
We've been, Shameless is so good.
Yeah.
Watch Stranger Things. If you don't already have that little sprinkle of trauma in your life and you need some to give you flavor, watch Stranger Things.
And quite frankly, if anyone is here to talk about the tragic, unspoken backstories of either Billy Hargrove or Bucky Barnes, I'm here for you. Reach out.
You can link my socials down there too. I'm here. I'm always here to talk about Bucky Barnes.
Word.
Always. Every day.
Yeah, that's true. So besides, listening to music, I do a lot of writing outside of the podcast that I, don't really publish necessarily. A lot of it is for me.
She loves a good t-shirt dress. I'll tell you that right now.
I wear them to bed.
Dude, she loves a good pair of leggings.
Yeah.
Any day.
Those are my work uniform,
yeah,
essentially.
Pretty much. She's wearing a t-shirt and leggings right now.
Yes. I wore business clothes.
Yeah.
Suits for 18 years. I am over it.
I remember being a little kid and trying on her 8-inch pumps that were
and also the heels. That was pre-second pregnancy. Let's just say after that, flats for life, baby.
Yeah. You owned more blazers than t-shirts, yes. I think.
I only recently donated so many blazers. It's not even funny. T-shirts and leggings. That is from now on my go-to gear.
All right. Last question. Ash L on Facebook says, what have you learned about yourself since the beginning of the blog and podcast? How has devoting so much time to the project changed you as a person / as a mom? You spend less time with us now. Kidding. Well,
at least I'm home all the time. I'm not commuting 45 minutes each way.
That's true.
I have learned a whole lot, I think, as a person and a podcaster. Yeah, I definitely cringe at some of the earlier episodes. Not just the things I said, but I just hadn't learned the way yet. And I'm still learning. Believe me, I know I still screw up all the time. And I'm more than willing to own it. So feel free, point it out. I always love the reviews at 1 star. This podcast lady's an idiot.
Stop leaving her bad reviews because I'm going to be laying in bed ready to fall asleep and she'll be like, Andy!
And I'll be laughing.
Andy! And then she's laughing hysterically because I got a 1-star review because you said a bad word, and that's the review. That's the whole review. Stop leaving her bad reviews.
Yeah, stop leaving me bad reviews because Andy has to hear about it.
Yeah.
So I think I've improved a lot. I definitely try not to be as unnecessarily judgmental. I was a lot freer with some of the things I would say, but also I think I've developed a lot. I had tons of empathy before, but I think it was maybe misdirected in some ways, and I feel like it's going where it needs to go at this point. I definitely have learned a lot, and I hope that it shows in some improvement in the episodes, but that is up to you guys. And then as far as how much time I've devoted to it and how it's changed me as a person or as a mom, I think that the quarantine situation with COVID really had more to do with it than the podcast itself. I don't like to leave the house anymore. I'm not a social person anymore, whereas I was seeing people every day for many years. It's definitely changed a lot as far as that goes. But yeah, like I said before, I've met or at least spoken with a lot of really great people that I am grateful to have in my life. And I've met a number of them and continue to meet a number of them. And yeah, so I'm grateful for that. That's definitely made me a better person, I think. I'm not commuting anymore, which I was before, so there was less time at home. So I think being at home is better. I definitely do spend a lot more time working than I did before. I definitely wasn't as happy. Okay, it's hard to say I'm happy with my job right now because it is so very sad. But what I'm doing now with the podcast and everything is so much more rewarding than any job I've ever done. So well, I'm grateful for the experience I had in, the banking industry and whatnot, and the people I met. This is a million times more rewarding and definitely makes me feel like I'm doing something that matters, at least to some people. So that's made my life a lot better. So that's it for the questions. If this comes up again and I have enough questions, I'll definitely do it again. I had fun. So thank you all so much for your questions. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for asking about me. I tried not to be awkward. I'm sure it was super awkward, and we'll see how it turns out when I edit all of that. But
not with me. I'm the coolest person alive.
That is true.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, Mom.
Thanks for coming on the show, Andrew.
You're welcome, Laine.
Oh, that's so weird.
That's it for this week. Thank you for joining my mom. And tune in for next week's episode.
Thanks, everyone. Stay tuned for some insane bloopers. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something. Okay, that's a good question. I'm not going to leave that in because that's rude. What's it? The other questions suck. Okay. You have to stop moving.
My leg is so itchy. Sorry, okay.
It's moving my desk.
My leg is so itchy right now.
That's fair.
I can't help it.
Okay, that's fair.
Thank you.
Ricky is staring at the door for
moving
no
on
reason.
I pick up this game. Hold on. This is not a good. This is
This is our life.
Sound like a baby. He's laughing for the
Oh, what happened? Did you exorcise a demon?
Just call me Sam Winchester.
Oh, Lucifer.
Namaste, Spiritus Mundus. How to get...
You remember this?
Of course I know the exorcism from Supernatural. What do you take me for?
Oh my god. We have gone off the rails.
You can hear me hiccuping constantly. Moving on, Max says...
Oh,
what?
Bring it down.
Max says? Max says... okay. Dude, you should have let me re-record this with a British accent. That would have been so funny.
Don't worry, I'll just put it through a filter where you sound like Squidward now.
Remember all the things you took? Whatever that fucking never goes.
Okay. Just Andy eating Skittles. Just sitting here eating Skittles.
I'm trying.
The cat's watching you. The dog's having trouble getting comfortable. Okay, and so... Okay, there's the dog. Life is good, yo. Shut up.
Sorry.
You're the devil.
I'll wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, which isn't unusual for me, and Mom will be sitting at the table with her coffee,
giggling,
and her, I don't know, avocado toast or something, and she'll just be giggling. I'm like, it's too early for you to be giggling. She'll be like, look at this 1-star review I got. Somebody said I'm an asshole. And I'm like, I get it.
Listen, I feel seen.